Hello, dear friends, and welcome back to this next instalment of the Law of Arms, possibly the most comprehensive written account of weapons and armour ever made. I found it in a local charity shop. It's full of wonderful illustrations and descriptions, with Chapter 3. Here we have a man-at-arms clad in mail from head to toe, preparing to release a trebuchet. So the catapult, a projectile throwing engine, uses the power of recovery of twisted fibre, often human hair, used in pre-Christian times. In the dry climate of the Mediterranean, it worked reasonably satisfactorily in summer campaigns, but when the fibres were wet, they lost their resilience and the catapult became almost useless. In the reigns of northern Europe, the device was impractical, but as late as 1327, Walter de Millemet's lesson book still illustrated torsion artillery. That's interesting. I would have always thought that it didn't work very well in the rain because of perhaps the wood or something like that. I didn't realise that it was human hair being used to create the tension to wind the winch up. Here we have an Italian falchion of the mid-16th century. The hilt is made of gilt bronze and the blade is edged with the crowned arms of Cosimo de' Medici, encircled by the collar of the Golden Fleece. Wonderfully elaborate. A sabre inscribed with the name and title of the Turkish Sultan Mohammed II. This is a hand and a half sword from the mid-15th century, probably Swiss. And a Swiss sabre here, the Schweizer sabre or Schnepfer, with the characteristic lion's head pommel and long, slightly curved blade. The science of fortification advanced considerably at the end of the 12th century as a result of lessons learned on the campaigns of the Third Crusade, in the course of which the Franks witnessed the power of siege engines, and of sapping and of mining. Whenever possible, new castles were now built on high ground, ideally with the inner bailey protected at its rear by a cliff. The approaches were covered by the strongest defences, sometimes 3 lines deep. Chateau Galliard, built high above the Seine between 1195 and 98 by Richard I of England, was among the first of this new type to incorporate these features. Its great donjon points like a ship's bow towards an attacking enemy to deflect the projectiles from his engines, and a deep battered plinth and stone machicolations at the battlements served as extra defences against sapping. Sidney Toy has suggested that this may be the earliest example to Western Europe of this latter form of protection. Some more weapons here. We have a Swiss war flail, an iron ball bound with 2 spiked steel straps attached to a halved, 45.3 inches long, from the late 16th or early 17th century. I always find this particular weapon is quite barbarous, isn't it? Just horrible. This is a plain view of Chateau Gaillard, the moat there, and the inner bailey there, the donjon there, and the middle bailey, and the outer bailey. Quite a lot of work to get into it. So the mechanical advantage derived from the extension of the human arm by use of the sling, the spear thrower, and the omentum were also made sure of by many agricultural communities in the form of the flail. By loosely linking a separate head to a long-halved, corn threshers could get a much faster stroke, and this inevitably commended the flail as a weapon for peasant armies. At first, infantry used it without modification, but by the 3rd century, soldiers had flails made specifically for fighting, some having the head and haft linked by a short length of chain. The elongated flail head was retained alongside a version which used a heavy iron or wooden ball armed with iron spikes. Short-hafted war flails for mounted use were known as Chiesa, and 2 of Historisches museums in Switzerland have long hafts of 3.5 and 4.5 feet, respectively, for use by infantry. In the Korim Museum, Czechoslovakia, are 2 from the Hussite Rising with hafts measuring more than 6 feet. It's interesting, isn't it? Kiev was famous as a flail-making centre in the 12th and 13th centuries, and the flail mounting ring at the apex. I always thought that this particular type of weapon looks like the kind of weapon that would snap quite easily, like the chain would break. Maybe not. This is a rather splendid chap, the tomb of Mastino II della Scala at Verona, Italy. His family badge, a ladder, appears on the horse trapper, and a helm from the Madeleine in Switzerland, the first quarter of the 14th century. Here we have crested helms from the 14th century seals in the Riksarkiv in Stockholm. This is the helm of a knight of Kornberg in the mid-14th century, and the Chapel de Fur or kettle hat, stamped twice with the mark of the maker, Hans Vettelin of Innsbruck in Austria. The second half of the 13th century saw a lengthening of swords used from horseback and an extension of their grips to allow them to be wielded with either one or two hands. From circa 1300, blades were lengthened further from about 35 to 40 inches, or about 45 to 50 inches, the larger form remaining in common use until the 16th century, when it was called the bastard sword, because it was neither a two-handed sword nor quite usable for use by one hand alone. Modern collectors have tended to use the milder term hand-and-a-half sword, in the same spirit as they use kidney dagger instead of the contemporary ballock knife. The bastard sword retained the proportions of the medieval sword that immediately preceded it. It had a simple crossguard, either straight, drooping towards the ends, or recurved vertically or horizontally. In January 1608, Shah Abbas the Great of Persia received a gift of a magnificent illuminated Bible that is now preserved in the Pierpont Morgan Library in New York. The illustrations in the Great Bible were probably made in France about 1250, before it was taken to Italy for the edition of the text. From there it eventually reached Cardinal Majowski of Krakow. The cardinal sent it to Shah Abbas with a papal mission, which passed through Krakow on a journey to Persia that was to take more than 3 years. The Bible contains by far the best surviving battle pictures of the 13th century and affords the most detailed available particulars of the arms and armour of the time. By 1220 the face guard was in common use, and very soon the helm, the so-called great helm, had been developed through the intermediate stages of an added neck guard, which was extended round the sides to join a deep face guard. Here we have maces produced in southern Russia from the 11th century onwards, which often had geometric heads like these, and two long hafted spike maces made to be wielded with both hands, sometimes known as morning stars or holy water sprinklers. What are these rather macabre names for them? This is the monumental brass of Sir John de Abernun the Younger, who wears a bassinet of fluted steel, from which he hangs a mail tippet or aventail to protect his throat. His body and limbs are protected by coat armour, a coat of plates, a hauberk and an alcoton. The mail on his upper arms, leg and feet is supplemented by plate armour. As the face was now covered and some means of identifying the wearer in the heat of battle was essential, the crest seems to have undergone a revival. It had been out of use from the end of the migration period until a single appearance is recorded in the last years of the 12th century, followed by rare occurrences in the art of the 13th century. Relatively frequent instances of its use occur in the early 14th century. Crests were sometimes painted on each side of the helm, but more often they were modelled as birds or animals, or as little pennants set on short staves attached to the top of the helm. From the middle of the 13th century, contemporary illustrations show, with increasing frequency, reinforced pollens of plate attached to the knees of the mail chassis or the gamboist cuisses. By 1250, coiters formed of small steel discs appear on the elbow of the mail shirt, and metal greaves are strapped to the shins. As the illustrations of the period almost invariably show the warrior in a surcoat, it is difficult to estimate quite when or how the development of armour for the trunk occurred, but the armoured surcoat reinforced with rows of plates was made and worn in Germany during the 13th century, and examples in the first 30 years of the 14th century are known from Scandinavia and Italy. Here we have more more of these old lovely yieldy descriptions of particular weapons. So we have the crossbow here, and a maker puts the finishing touches to a crossbow. On the wall hang arrows and crossbows for sale, and in the foreground are a spanning belt and part of a windlass. The simplest spanning belt consisted of a steel hook attached to a strong girdle. So, with one foot in the crossbow's stirrup, the crossbowman stooped, engaged the hook on the cord, and straightened, thus drawing the cord to the trap. A stronger bow could be drawn by using a spanning belt with the hook on a pulley which moved on a rope. The free end of the rope would be attached to a peg on the tiller when the bow was being drawn. So you kind of pull it up with your waist and an actual metal thing pulls it up, I suppose. It must have, again, if it's that taut, it must have been shot with tremendous force. Here we have a very fancy version of the form, the commonest medieval type of crossbow arrow here seen from the side, and above was a yew of ash, or had a quadrangular head. The three fletchings would be made of stiff feathers, wood or metal. So this is a German sporting crossbow and Kranikin from the 17th century. The crossbow trigger seen in position in the stock, so when the trigger is pressed upwards, its point drops down out of the notch in the nut and it releases the cord. The Kranikin for spanning a powerful crossbow here, so the loop of cord is slipped over the tiller until it stops against two pegs. When the handle is turned, the small cogwheel turns the large cogwheel, which engages the triple-toothed cogwheel in the middle. This then draws the ratchet bar to which the claws are attached down until the cord is held by the nut. Here Swedish crossbowmen rain arrows on cavalry advancing over ground strewn with caltrops. And an Italian crossbowman here of 1475, nice feather, spans his weapon with a Kranikin. And this is from a painting of the martyrdom of Saint Sebastian in the church of Saint Petronius in Bologna. And lastly, we have a target crossbow as used today by some Belgian shooting clubs. That's it. Looks like almost like a modern rifle. Bullet shooting crossbows were made in large numbers in the northwest of England in the first half of the 19th century. An integral bending lever and efficient lock mechanism made them quick and simple to shoot. The foresight was a metal yew carrying a cotton skin threaded with a bead. The hinged rear had several peepholes, each with different range. For shooting vertically upwards at Popinjay said on a high pole or tower. Some crossbowmen shoot round bullets from a crossbow with a barrel. The bow is fastened to the stock with the steel bridle that can be tightened with a tome bar. It's interesting, isn't it? You can see this eventual evolution into the bullet rifle here. So we're on to chapter 4. Here we have some Landsknechts duelling with Rundle daggers. So a Hallig knife here, or a dudgeon dagger, dated 1620. According to tradition, it was taken from Colonel Blood when he was caught trying to steal the English crown jewels in 1671. Colonel Blood, that sounds like something from like a Cluedo game or something, doesn't it? Was that a nickname, or was he actually Colonel Blood? This is a mid-19th century Scottish dirk and scabbard with fork and by-knife. So 19th century antiquarian prudery gave the name kidney dagger to a type of dagger, usually with a stiff blade suitable only for stabbing, which was known to its 14th century users as a ballock knife. Any doubt one might have thought about the sexual significance of the phallic handle springing from two rounded lobes is dispelled by contemporary illustrations that show it hung on a low-slung belt, the blade between the thigh of its wearer, who was usually a civilian. It was a northern form common in the Low Countries, Germany, and in Britain, where it remained in use 17th century, known as a dudgeon dagger, perhaps from the boxroot dudgeon, so often used to make its hilt. In Scotland, the form survived in the dirk, carried by most classes of society, a larger weapon than the dudgeon dagger, and first appeared in a portrait of around 1670 in the Scottish National Portrait Gallery. The parallel-sided grip is wrapped in fish skin, bound with steel or silver wire, and fitted with a slightly domed pommel of gilt metal. Deep haunches protect the hand. In one dirk, inscribed "Fear God and Do Not Kill" 1680, the haunches are rounded in the style of the earlier daggers, but its pommel is of a flat discoid form found on most Scottish dirks. Bit of a weird, ironic message to be written on a dagger, isn't it? Here we have the rather fancy set of armour here. Conrad Suzanova made this armour between the years 1512 and 1514 at the Innsbruck court workshop of Maximilian I, the 12-year-old Archduke, later the Emperor Charles V. Wow, so a 12-year-old. That's incredible, isn't it? These are German bronze figures of jousters, probably the childhood toys of Maximilian I, made to run at each other by means of pulleys and cords. On contact, one of the jousters would be unhorsed. It's quite fun, isn't it? Here we have two battles fought within 4 years of each other around the end of the 13th century, demonstrated the interdependence of archers and cavalry when faced by determined pikemen. 2 miles south of Falkirk in Scotland on July the 22nd, 1298, English cavalry drove a handful of archers and cavalry in the Scottish army from the field. They then faced Wallace's solid skiltron of 12-foot pikes wielded by unarmoured Scots, which they were unable to break until after several hours Edward I ordered his horse to withdraw to allow his archers a clear shot at the Scots infantry. It was not long before the English shots began to tear gaps in the Scottish ranks, through which the English cavalry then charged to cut down the childrens, whose main defence disappeared as the solidity of their hedgehog was shattered. Some 5,000 Scots perished in a battle that was politically inconclusive, but that demonstrated all too clearly the vulnerability of unsupported pike phalanxes, however resolute, against a combination of cavalry and skilled bowmen. The corollary was proved during the Flemish revolt against Philip IV of France. The French heavy cavalry that charged the Flemish pikes outside Courtrai on July the 11th, 1302, was supported by Italian mercenaries and Gascon javelin men, but there were not enough crossbowmen among them to make a decisive contribution to the crossbow exchanges across the Groningen epic. A combination of poor communication that brought the French horse on to action through their own infantry, and the heavy going on in the marshy ground beside the stream, threw Robert of Artois' cavalry attack into confusion. 3 successive attempts to break the Flemish lines were met with advancing phalanxes of levelled pikes, which first broke, then scattered the French army. As at Falkirk, the visitors won little political gain, but their arms showed, for the first time since Adrianople 10 centuries before, that infantry could defeat a mounted force if they did not also have to face the long-range attacks of accurate, well-coordinated archers. Here we have smiths using a trip hammer to forge a bar of iron. Water is poured into the bar as the hammer falls, which helps to scale off impurities. It's a big old hammer, isn't it? This is an illustration from Olaus Magnus showing smiths using overshot mills to power bellows and trip hammers. The late 15th century Italian dagger Cinquedia here, the blade stamped on each side with the mark attributed to the maker Biscotto of Villa Basilica near Lucca. And early 16th century Italian bills here, probably a part of the armament of Henry VIII's army. No new arms or new technology dominated the field at Bannockburn in June 1314 in Scotland's greatest victory over the English, which is something that we are reading about in the Chronicles of the Age of Chivalry series with Edward II. Inspired leadership spiced with the example of personal bravery carried the day in a battle where the odds were heavily on the side of the invader. According to the numbers usually brought into the field in the early 14th century, the army which King Edward II assembled at the border town of Berwick was huge, Alongside 3,000 men-at-arms marched 20,000 infantry, their supplies accompanying them on more than 100, some say 104 sluggish ox-drawn carts. The Scots, King Robert the Bruce, mustered his army near Falkirk, 14,000 infantry armed with 14-foot pikes, and a small contingent of 500 or so mounted men. From Falkirk they marched to a point 2 miles south of Stirling, where the army dug potholes and covered them with bracken to protect their front. There it was hoped it would break up any charge by Edward's superior cavalry. On June 23rd, the first day of the English patrols reached Bannockburn, which the leader Sir Humphrey de Bohun crossed to engage the King of the Scots in single combat. The result has long since passed into Scottish folklore. The young knight charged the Bruce, who deflected his lance thrust and dashed out the Englishman's brains with his axe. Much of the mystique that has grown up around this tale in the recounting probably stems from the references to Bruce's being mounted on a small pony, in contradistinction to the charger ridden by Bohun. Whatever the reason, the English captain's death and another setback suffered by the English on the spears of the Scottish schildren on the same day had a euphoric effect on the morale of the Scots, many of them farmers recently called from their land. The English morale was as bad as the Scots was good, and quarrels between their leaders did nothing to help. Edward's army crossed the Burn overnight, and on the morning of June 24 they attacked the steady Scottish phalanxes, who advanced towards them over level ground of their own choosing. By the untidiness of their charges, the English cavalry frequently found themselves between their own archers and an enemy that had prepared for an infantry flanking action by leaving a squadron of horse under Sir Robert Keith to deal with such an eventuality. As the battle turned in the Scots' favour, the sight of Scottish camp followers on nearby Coxet Hill was enough to panic the English into the belief that there were reinforcements, and the rout was on. In evidence of the completeness of their victory, the Scots could show the Privy Seal of England, brought into Scotland by the King and left there with 22 of his barons, 68 knights and 1,000 men dead on the battlefield, and the Earl of Hereford, captured at Bothwell with 1,000 foot and 600 horse a few days later. To the men who had fought at Falkirk 15 years before, the victory must have been exceedingly sweet. Yet the aims of both leaders had been satisfied in part at least. The English king had manoeuvred the Scots into fighting a decisive battle as he intended, and Robert drove the invaders from his kingdom. The Scots were never to defeat the old enemy so decisively again, and the fearful tragedy of Flodden was less than 2 centuries away. Here we have the oldest firearm known, a bronze gun of the first half of the 14th century, found at Lossell in Sweden. The section shows the touch hole and chamber. Wow. In the 1300s there was a gun. That must have been insane to have witnessed. I wonder how effectively it would have worked. So it was found at Lossell in Swedish Scania in 1861, unfortunately on a site that cannot be dated by other evidence. It's so close to the form of the guns in the millimetre sketches, although much smaller, that most students consider it to be from approximately the same period. It's almost certainly the earliest firearm known, roughly vase-shaped with a bore of 1.4 inches at the muzzle, tapering to 1.2 inches before opening out again to a powder chamber of 1.4 inches, into which the vent or touch hole is drilled at a right angle. As the gun has no fastenings, one must assume that it was strapped to a wooden stock with bands of iron or some other material more perishable than its own bronze. So since no 14th century illustration of a handheld firearm is known, one can only guess at the form of the attachment. Like the guns in the millimetre sketches, it was fired with an iron rod heated in a brazier or by a piece of smouldering tinder held in the firer's hand. The gunpowder used in these early guns varied from country to country, perhaps even from city to city. By 1546, different proportions were used for large and medium guns and for mortars. The proportions of saltpetre to sulphur and charcoal recommended by 14th century writers varied from 6 to 1 to 2 by Marcus Gracchus in 1300 to 22 to 4 to 5 by Montauban in 1400. Even the least effective gave a massive expansion of gas on ignition. A pound of black powder produces about 40 cubic feet of gas on combustion, hence the need for thick-walled chambers even at an early date. Within 15 years or so, the first illustrations of firearms, before they made any great impact on war, some guns were made in 2 sections. One part was the chamber for the powder charge, and the other the barrel, a directional tube that took the projectile. The chamber was wedged into the rear of the barrel when firing, was fired from a gun made this way in the Artois castle of Rialt. The lighter guns of this earlier period were of cast bronze or wrought iron, with stocks of 1 or 4 basic types so that they could be fired when held in the hands. The earliest were probably tied to a wooden stock with metal bands. Others had socketed breeches. A third group had the breech beaten out in a long handle, and a fourth had a point that was driven into the stock. So on that revelation, I think we'll put a pin in it here for this day's video. So I look forward to having you join me